Hello and welcome to Fun Bikes TV. My name is James and today we're going to be building a 1010 250RX bike. When you uncrate the bike, you will find the front wheel is inside the cage. Your front mudguard will be attached to the rear wheel. You'll have a box of parts which will include your front number board, your bar pad cover, your pit bike manual, your front axle, keys, handlebar clamps and bolts. You'll also find a separate cardboard box with your fork legs inside there as well. Once you've removed the bike from the cage, you'll then need to finish unpackaging it and cutting all the cable ties that attach the bars and bits to the bike for transport. The first thing we're going to do is fit the fork legs into the yokes. You'll find in the box with your fork legs there are two styles to them. There's this one with no extra brackets on it, which fits on the right hand side of the bike when you are sat on it. And then you have this one with the extra brackets for mounting the brake caliper, which fits to the left hand side of the bike when you sat on the bike. Using a 10 spanner or socket, take the fork leg and slide it through from the bottom on the yokes. Levelling it off at the top so the collar is sitting top level with the top of the yoke. Once you've done this, start to tighten the bolts using the 10 spanner or socket. Nip them all up first so that the fork leg is secure. And then make sure they're properly tight, doing a bit of a turn on one and then a fraction of a turn on the other as you're going along to make sure they're tightened equally at the top and the bottom. Once you have the first fork leg secure, move on to the fork leg for the opposite side. Again, making sure that the collar at the top is in the same position and height. And then tighten the clamp bolts on the yoke on the opposite side. Right, so we're now going to attach the handlebars using the two handlebar clamps that came in the box and the 4 bolts with them as well. You'll need a 6 Allen key to do these, and we do advise you to a small quantity of stud lock on the end of the threads. Remove the bubble wrap from the handlebars. Take your handlebars and place them into the clamps. I'll a small quantity of stud lock to the end of the thread and using 6 Allen key, nip them up. When placing the bars into the bike, ensure that the angle of the rise on the bars is the same angle as the forks. So when you're looking from one side, they're straight with each other. Also ensure your bars are central within the bike itself. So checking your gap on the outside of the clamps to where the bar starts to curve upwards and adjust accordingly. So we're now going to make sure the bottom number board mounting bolts are tight and the two fork stop bolts are tight using a 6 Allen key. And then 8 spanner or socket. We're now going to fit the front wheel into the bike. The first thing we need to do is make sure the valve locking nut is tight. Using a 10 spanner and also using a 14 spanner, check that the rim lock on the opposite side is tight as well. In the box of the parts you'll find you've got the front axle with it. Undo the threading end and remove the 2 spacers. Take the spacers and pop them into the dust seals. On each side. And then using a 10 spanner or socket, loosen off the locking bolts on the bottom of the front forks to allow you to slide the axle through. The larger side of the axle goes in from the right hand side of the bike when you are sat on it. Once you're happy with the positioning of the wheel in the bike, using a 12 and a 10 Allen key, tighten up the front axle. Once this is tight, tighten up your clamp bolts at the bottom of the forks. And then spin the wheel to make sure it's spinning freely within the bike. We are now ready to fit the front brake caliper to the bike. We're now going to fit the front brake caliper to the bike. Remove the bumper wrap off the brake caliper and remove the bolts, spacers and washers from the caliper. You'll see in the caliper there's a plastic pad to stop the brake pads getting squashed together if the lever gets caught in transit. Slide the brake caliper over the brake disc. You may just need to push the pads back slightly to get those to go on for you. Taking the bolts, remove the spacers. There's 1 spacer per bolt and then 2 washers on each bolt. The spacer goes on the inside. Loosely thread in one of the bolts and then align and position the second bolt and spacer again on the inside. We've now attached the front caliper. So we now need to route the front brake hose and fit the front mudguard and number board to the vehicle. We're now going to fit the front number board and mudguard to the vehicle. Remove the cellophane cover. Stop the front mudguard on top of the wheel to start off with. Tracing the wire down from your clutch sensor switch, you'll need to connect this into the electrics if it is disconnected. Find the bundle of wires on the front and locate the single connector in there with nothing on it and clip it into position. If that is not connected, your bike will not start off the electric start. They do have a clutch sensor switch in. The clutch has to be fully depressed for the bike to start. Remove the 2 bolts at the top and bottom for holding the front number board on. Taking your front number board and the silver clips you removed, place them over the top of the top sections of the number board to line up with the holes. Ensure that your front brake hose is located on the front of the number board. Only attach these ones at the top loosely at first to allow you to align everything. If you start to tighten the bolts up fully, it makes it a lot harder to align the rest of the bolts on the mudguard and number board. Your mudguard, ensure it sits on top just there because the bolts are just going to go through and it's going to sit on the bolts. And loosely start to put all the bolts back through, the longer ones at the front where you remove them from and the shorter ones at the back. Again, only put them in loosely at this moment in time until you've got all 4 bolts in that hold the front mudguard on. Use an 8th socket, tighten the 4 mudguard bolts up. Ensuring once you've got them through, the longer ones at the front, that the 2 holes drilled into the bottom of the front mudguard sit over the threads of the bolts. And then fully tighten the bolts up. On the bottom for the mudguard and then the top for the number board. We're now going to route the brake hose on the front of the vehicle. Using again the 8 spanner or socket, undo the collar on the front and guide. Slide your cover down, then place the hose through the guide clamp. We now just need to put the hose through the guide on the fork leg itself and reattach it using the Phillips screwdriver. We've now assembled the front end of the bike. The only thing left to do is to make sure that the front brake disc bolts at the bottom are nipped up securely using a 4 Allen key and a 10 spanner. Okay, now we've assembled the front end of the bike, we're going to work our way backwards along the vehicle, making sure that everything is tight. Using a 5 Allen key, make sure that your plastic bolts are nipped up tight. Do this on both sides of the vehicle as you're going along. Using a 10 and 12 spanner, make sure your front engine mount bolts are tight. When you've done this, apply a small quantity of stud lock to the end of the threads. At the same time, using a 12 spanner, make sure the exhaust manifold on the front of the engine is nipped up tight. Using 10 spanner, make sure the roller is tight on the bike. And then using 13 and 14, make sure the plastic mounting brackets are tight on the vehicle as well. Again, doing both sides at the same time. Using 17 spanner, make sure the stand is tight on the bike. And using your 5 Allen key, make sure that your gear shift is tight. Using 5 Allen key and a 10 spanner, check the fuel tap is tight on the vehicle. And at the rear of the vehicle, check your swing arm protector is tight with the 5 Allen key. Also check your chain guide at the rear with a 5 Allen key. At the same time, check your rear sprocket bolts using a 5 Allen key and a 12 spanner. We're now going to run over the opposite side of the bike and make sure all the other parts on there are tight before attaching the rear suspension. Okay, so now I'm going to finish off checking this side of the bike. First of all, check your heat shield is tight using a 5 Allen key. Using a 13 spanner, make sure your kickstart is tight on the vehicle. Using a 5 Allen key, that your brake pedal is tight. And then using a 4 Allen key, make sure that your rear brake master cylinder is tight on the vehicle. We're also going to check that the rear engine mount bolts are tight. So using a 13 socket on one side and 14 on the other. Check that the engine mount bolts are tight on the vehicle. Both the upper and the lower one that's tucked in at the back. We're also going to check that the rear brake disc is tight at this point as well, again using the 4 Allen key and 10 spanner. We are now ready to attach the rear suspension to the vehicle. We're now going to attach the rear suspension onto the vehicle. You'll need a 14 and 17 spanner or socket combination to do this. To start off with, remove the bolt that goes to the linkage for the suspension. You now need to align the suspension with the mounting points on the rear swing arm. The easiest way to do this is to bounce it on your knee if you're using a stand. Be careful that you don't trap your fingers if the weight changes on the vehicle when you're moving things around. At the same time, once you've tightened the bolt you've refitted, ensure that all the other suspension bolts on the bike are tight at the rear. Once you're happy that all the bolts are tight, apply a small quantity of stud lock to the end of all the threads. Ensure that the valve locking nut is tight on the rear wheel using a 10 spanner, and that the rim lock using a 14 spanner is also tight. We're now ready to remove the seat and connect the battery on the vehicle. Okay, we're now ready to remove the seat and attach the battery. Using a 10 spanner or socket, remove the seat mounting bolts at the rear. And lift up the seat at the rear and then pull it backwards. Okay, we're now ready to attach the battery to the vehicle. On top of the battery you'll find this little plastic bag taped on, which has got your battery terminal screws. You'll find there is 2 screws, 2 nuts and 2 washers. Into the battery, take the screws and pop them in from the outside, pointing upwards, so they've been situated in like this for attaching your battery terminals. Inside your terminals, to attach the leads to. Make sure you connect the red positive lead to the red battery terminal with the plus next to it, and the black negative lead, which also has your earth wire on, to the black terminal with the minus next to it. Using a Phillips screwdriver, ensure your terminals are fully tight, and then pull the covers over the top of the terminals. Okay, now we've put the terminals onto the bike, we're just going to make sure the bike turns over. The yellow button is the ignition button on your handlebars on the right hand side. If you press this without depressing the clutch, nothing will happen. Fully depress the clutch lever on the left hand side and check the bike turns over. Okay, we're now ready to reattach the seat onto the bike. Removing the plastic cover. You'll need to slot this section just here back onto the bolt that is raised slightly with the washer on at the front of the fuel tank section. Then pushing the seat down at the rear, reattach the 2 bolts through the plastics into the mounting points. And using the 10 socket to retighten them. Okay, we're now going to put the last couple of bits onto the bike. Start with, we're going to feed the number board section through and clip it into place. Just goes around the bars and then pull it through at the bottom to go through one of the holes. So the number board is secured on there. We're then going to fit the bar pad. You'll see on one side of the bar pad it's a solid edge, on the other side it has a notch cut out of it. This notch needs to be at the back pointing towards the rider. It's to allow the breather pipe from the fuel tank to sit in the top of the headstock. Feed the bar pad cover around, aligning the slot in the bar pad cover with where the breather pipe is going to go through. Then place your breather pipe in the slot, like so. We've now finished fully assembling our 250RX 1010 bike. The only thing we're left to do would be to do an oil change on it before the first use. This bike comes with a transport oil in. To change the oil, you need a 17 spanner or socket to undo the sump plug at the front of the bike. Drain the oil out of the vehicle and then refill through the dipstick on the side once you've replaced the sump plug. Do make sure you do regular nut and bolt checks on the vehicle before or after every use to help maintain the vehicle and ensure that nothing works loose on it. Thank you for watching Fun Bikes TV.